it opens the window to this idea that's false, that there's a level playing field, and that's just not true. I mean, the reason that you have superstars in their sport is that they were born with these advantages. And it's not a fact that you can just work really hard and become Olympic champion.
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, who was a competitive swimmer before she started running, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 26 of the Running for Real podcast. I am really excited that you are here today, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen, whether you're out running, whether you're out doing chores, whether you are just sitting on the couch, taking a second to yourself, which is okay. We're all allowed to do that too. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate that you are here with us today. So last week we talked to Nancy Clark, and it was kind of a bit more of a personal episode. We were talking about nutrition and a lot of the mistakes that many runners make, myself included, and I had no idea for all those years that I wasn't eating the right kind of foods or enough of it. And I think it was a really eye-opening episode for a lot of people. So if you haven't been feeling great in your running, if you are noticing some symptoms that don't seem to add up with anything else, make sure you go back and check that one out with Nancy Clark. That is episode 25. Now today I have Christie Aschwanden, who is a journalist who has just about every accolade a journalist could have next to their name. She's kind of got the dream job when it comes to journalism of what she gets to do. And I thought I'd bring her on because she's someone who's not afraid of saying her mind, talking about controversial topics, and just being honest with us. There's too many experts that we have on who kind of skate around the point because they're afraid of saying anything. But Christie isn't like that, and I really wanted to dive into some topics today, and we're going to get into those. I really think you're going to enjoy it. It's quite a different episode, I guess, to other ones because it's just a lot more real and exposing things that we might not have discussed before, even things that I was quite nervous talking about. So hopefully you find this one interesting. After a quick word from our sponsor, I'll be right to the episode. Smoothies, recovery bowl, bars, cookies, biscotti. What do all of those have in common? Any ideas? You can make them with Generation UCAN. How's that for a win-win? Learn more about Generation UCAN at generationyoucan.com, and I will give you a coupon code later in the episode for 10% off. Christie, welcome to the Running for Real podcast. I am really excited that you're going to be here today. I am looking forward to kind of diving into some topics that many people are a little bit too afraid to talk about. So I think this is going to be kind of fun today. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be great. And, firstly, for people who will go into kind of your career and the intersection of running in your career first, but maybe if you could just tell us a little bit about your background, just as a runner in general, when you started running, what your favorite event is, just a few little bits about your history.
Yeah, sure. So I started running when I was 13 years old, a freshman in high school. I had gone out for the volleyball team, and I'm pretty tall for being female, and so I thought I'd be good at volleyball, and I wasn't. I didn't even make the C team, so I ended up. But I had a friend who was a cross country runner, and she said, "Oh, come out for this." And so I've been really disappointed at not making volleyball, but it turned out that I was immediately a good runner. I think I was, in the first meet, even running varsity. And anyway, so I had a great running career in high school, was state champion in the 1600, runner-up twice in cross country. And then I went and ran at University of Colorado. But my freshman year, at the very end of cross country season, I was in a car accident, banged up my knee, and had to stop running. So actually became a cyclist and a cross country skier. But then I kind of, at some point, started running again, and it's always been my first love. So as a Nordic skier, I did a lot of running for training during the summer. And in fact, for many years, I was sort of doing the trail running circuit in Colorado. I did Pikes Peak Ascent like 5 or 6 times. The La Luz Trail Run in Albuquerque is a favorite. Anyway, so sort of by talent, I'm a middle distance runner. By love, I just love running long in the mountains. And so been doing that ever since.
So it's kind of cool that you started off as more of, I guess, a traditional runner, and then you went to, like you said, about the Nordic skiing, and then you kind of found your way back to running, but in a environment that was almost a middle ground between running and Nordic skiing. So you could like be safe with it. And then now you've been able to cement your place back in the running world. So that's really cool. And, you know, I always love hearing people's stories and how they kind of adapt and grow to running. And did you ever have any points where you didn't enjoy it, or was it from that age 13 onwards? You know, obviously when you had that accident, you couldn't do it, but I'm sure you missed it. But was there any point where you didn't like running, or is it always been a passion all the way through?
It's always been a passion. I mean, it's something that just feels good. It's a nice thing to be doing. I feel like there are athletes who do their sport and they sort of need to be good, and then they retire and they finish and that's it, and they don't do it anymore and they don't want to ever compete again. And then there's people like me who just sort of enjoy sort of the sport for the joy of it. And, you know, it was fun to be competitive. I won't say I don't like winning, but I'm sort of past that. And it's also just something that I will continue to do for the rest of my life because I enjoy it, and its value to me is intrinsic, and it's not something I need to be good at. I'm totally okay with getting beaten. In fact, last summer, I decided that I wanted to focus on 5Ks and maybe try and be a little bit more competitive. I hadn't been doing too much racing. You know, here and there I would hop into things, but not really training for anything. And I decided I wanted to spend the summer doing 5Ks. And so I did the first 5K that I jumped into. I had been skiing all winter, but I hadn't been doing too much running. And I got into this race and I got beaten, and I got beaten by someone in my own age group. And I was really bummed. And then I realized, what is wrong with you? Why do you that was just it was a really good sort of moment of reflection for me to realize that, you know, I've been blessed with this talent, you know, I have no illusions that I'm good at running because there's something better about me or because I work harder than other people, you know. And so it was really a nice moment for me to reflect on, like, it's okay to you know, not always be the best. And that was fun. And then throughout the summer, I did a bunch of 5Ks, which are super fun. In fact, I wrote a story for 538 about why 5K is the ideal event and better than the marathon. And I have done a marathon, and it's, I still prefer the 5K. Anyway, but yeah, it was really fun. And I got better as the season went along. But I also realized at some point that I'm sort of, you know, I'm in my 40s now and I still enjoy running. But the things that you need to do to get really good at something are, first of all, you know, probably cuts into your social life a little bit, you know, all definitely. This focus and whatnot. And I realized, you know what, I don't actually want to do, you know, I know that there are other things I could do to get a little bit faster, but I don't really want to do them right now. And that's okay. So I'm okay with not being as fast as I could be.
I think that'll resonate with a lot of people listening right out there, as they know that me being previously an elite runner until 6 months ago and kind of stepping away, that, you know, they could always see what I was doing with all those little things you had to do. And I think a lot of people realize that it's actually better to have that balance and not have it rule your life in a lot of ways. So I think most people would probably agree with you there. And then
totally, I realized, like, I didn't want to give up beer, and I wanted to continue to stay up late. And, you know, and it's like, you know, that's okay. That's the decision that I made. And, you know, if I was still 26 years old and, you know, trying to be nationally or internationally competitive, that's one thing. But, you know, I'm not going to do that, especially, you know, to win my local 5K.
No, I think that's a good thing. And, you know, there's a time and place for it, as you mentioned, but there's nothing wrong with that. And yeah, I think most people would agree with that. So then kind of going on into your career here, you are a journalist. You did mention about writing for 538, also for Washington Post, New York Times, Runner's World, and you've won all kinds of accolades. Very impressed by everything you've achieved, that you're probably the most awarded journalist I've ever spoken to personally. But, you know, I thought today we'd kind of focus on your work as a journalist and kind of how it intersects with the running world. And firstly, you know, just something I'm sure we're all wondering, because I know personally, as I do write for some publications and just my own blog, I have so many ideas like coming through my brain all the time while I'm running. So how often does that happen for you, that where you think, oh, this is going to be a good one? Or do you have like a strategy of what you do when you do think of those? If it happens all the time, do you write it on your hand? Do you like record yourself? Tell us a bit about how the kind of ideas come up relating to running.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think I could not be a writer without running. It's where I get my best ideas. It's where I get all of my best leads. And usually when I'm running and I get a great idea, I will just sort of ruminate on it and think about it. And sometimes I usually will have, depending on what I'm doing or where I'm running, I may have a little pack where I'll have like a little notebook or something.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have a little iPod that's really tiny that I bring along sometimes just for this. I would say I listen to music less than half the time because usually I just want to think.
Yep.
But I will record into it if I have something I really want to remember. But I found that it's actually most effective for me to just think about it. There's almost the stress of like, I've got this great idea and I need to remember it. And then as I continue, it's like, oh, I still have 3 more miles to get back home to write this down. But in those 3 miles, it's sort of cementing it in my brain.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really good. But I will actually also do this thing where there are times when I'm sort of stuck on a story or I can't quite figure out I want to say something, or sometimes it's a matter of I've done a lot of reporting on something and I'm trying to piece it all together and figure out sort of what the bottom line is. And sometimes I will actually deliberately go on a run just to think about, so on this run, I'm going to think about this story and I'm going to try and figure it out. And I found that's really effective. And my husband will tease me sometimes because I'll say, over breakfast, okay, I have a really busy day. I have the story I really have to figure out today. And then an hour later, I'm saying, okay, I'm going running. And he'll say, I thought you had all this running or all this writing to do. And I said, yes, I do. That's why I have to go for a run.
That makes total sense. And I could see that happening for a lot of people with, stress relief. If you're trying to think through, some kind of family conflict, how can I, keep everyone happy? And yeah, it definitely is a great time to kind of free your mind and let it, really focus on a topic. And yeah, I'm sure many of us have had experiences like that. And it's just great that you've used it to your advantage and clearly it's worked. You've kind of got the dream position to be in as a writer from all the, publications you write for, what you've achieved. And I thought maybe, what is it about writing that is so appealing for you? Like, is it kind of the excitement of chasing that like unique story, or is it just that you just get in the mindset? What is it that you love about writing?
Well, first off, I should be very frank and say that I actually hate writing. I love having written.
Yeah, there you go.
I really love reporting. One of the things I love about my job is I'm always learning new things. I get to talk to and meet interesting people. I really love that. I'm always learning new things. And if there's ever anything that I'm interested in, I can learn more about it or meet the most important people doing work in that field by doing a story about it. So that's always been a joy for me. And I'm being somewhat facetious when I say I hate writing, but writing's hard. Writing well is hard. And it gets easier, but only up to a point. And and I feel like the difficulty in writing something is sort of directly related to how passionate I feel about it and how sort of obsessed I've become with the topic. And so sometimes that can be difficult, but it always feels so rewarding. You're creating something out of nothing. It really is. Even journalism is this very nice creative process where you're taking these pieces and creating something completely new that didn't exist before. And so that's a really satisfying thing.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. And I could see, that you said about the process and how it can be stressful, but when you have something that comes out of the other side, a lot of what you're saying kind of reminds me of, almost like preparing for a race. You working your way up this journalism ladder, you're spending hours preparing, waiting for the right kind of opportunity or topic to grab your passion. Whereas like in running, it would be, you're training, you want to stay relatively injury free. Do you think there are a lot of parallels between the two?
Oh, absolutely. I just wrote a book. I'm in the first edits right now. And I spent about a year writing it, working on it. And it was so much like training for a big event. And my book is about exercise recovery. And so I was interviewing all of these elite and sort of serious amateur athletes. And I realized again and again, all of these things that they were telling me about their training and their recovery were so parallel to what I was doing with this project. And this feeling of like, okay, this is my priority right now. And, I had to give up a lot of things to get this book done because I was doing it on top of my day job. And it was so similar in a way. I felt like, I was the professional who was training for a marathon or something.
Yeah.
Or, my spare time that I would have otherwise been, going out and doing fun things. I was at my desk working on the book, which has also been a lot of fun. I don't want to diminish the experience, which has been great. But yeah, it really is. And the fact that it's sort of something that at some point feels unfathomable. Like I wrote 85,000 words, which just seems like, oh my gosh, that's so many, but you don't do it in one day. And it's sort of a building process. And there's sort of a periodization to it, beginning with all of the research, and then you get into the writing. And so the parallels were just very striking to me.
Yeah, when you have a lot of days, I'm sure, where you just have no interest or no motivation to do anything, same as in running, you'll have days where, I just don't want to go out for this run, or I don't want to have to do this. So it's just kind of cool to think about it. And within the, the journalism world, do you see a lot of other runners, like other people who kind of understand this, or is it most people tend to be, I don't have time for this running business kind of thing?
No, I would say, so my sample is probably biased because I'm a runner. I probably am more likely to know others. But no, I absolutely know a lot of other journalists who are runners. And in fact, I've also noticed, so at one point, I'm still in the masthead. I will still write for them some, but at one point I was writing very regularly for Runner's World. And it was so interesting how many people I would be interviewing for other stories for the New York Times or Washington Post or something. And they would say, oh, I know your byline for Runner's World, and so in particular, I've noticed that scientists tend to be runners. And I don't know why, but I've interviewed a lot of scientists and physicians
who
are runners. I know my work from that. But no, there's a lot of people that are journalists and writers who run. And I do think, there's that great Murray Murakami, What I Think About When he wrote a great book.
Yeah, I know which book you mean. I don't know what the title is.
About running. Fantastic. Yeah. But I do think that it's something, I don't think it's unique to me that running is great fodder for writing. I think that's a common thing among many people.
Yeah. It's one of the secrets that you've learned to understand, and people are starting to. Absolutely. And you've got the advantage there where you have. So let's talk about some of the articles. This is something I really wanted to dive into. You've written a lot, and maybe, it's kind of cool for me to interview you, because most people who I can interview about a topic, they're going to be very careful, because, they want to make sure that they are not kicking up a fuss or not saying anything that could be taken. Whereas you've obviously done the research, you've got the work behind you, you've done everything you need to do. And so you're not, you're okay talking about these kind of topics. So firstly, when it comes to controversial topics, do you kind of enjoy those? Is there a bit more of a challenge and something to think about? Or does it kind of still scare you thinking about this is something that I could get a lot of backlash for?
No, controversial subjects are interesting to write about. They can be tricky. It's very important to me that I get things right and that I'm careful. And if it's a controversy that truly has two perspectives or multiple perspectives, I want to be sure that I'm representing them correctly. But it's also sort of my job to adjudicate the evidence and not necessarily always make a judgment, but to be sure that I'm really presenting it in a proper way and that I'm getting all of the facts and things like that. But I do enjoy that. And in part because, often I want to decide what I think about it and sort of see, what should be done here.
Okay, so let's kind of go into some of those. You sent me a list of things that you've written about, and I've kind of researched myself as well. One I thought we could start with is something I don't think we've ever discussed on the podcast, which is the testosterone levels in women. So mostly, your article was about, and I should say for anyone listening, I'm going to post links to all the articles that we talk about today, so you can take a read through them afterwards. So Caster Semenya, let's kind of talk about her. In your article, you wrote that she should really be celebrated, and this is a great thing. So maybe tell us your thoughts on why this is. What are your thoughts on the situation?
Yeah. So my stand on this, and this is a little bit unusual in that I just decided to take a stand and sort of voice an opinion, and I came to an opinion. And that is, so the argument has been made that she poses a threat to women's sports. And I just want to be really fair here and say, we don't actually know her biological status and all of these things. It's sort of widely suspected, or people have talked about her being intersex. And what this means is, so we think of sex as being male or female, but it actually exists on a continuum. And there are a lot of different variations on things, which are more common actually than I realized before I had started writing about this. Anyway, but so the thought on her, this has never been confirmed. She's never said anything, but is that basically she produces extra testosterone and has more testosterone than most women. And I'm not sure, there are different variations of this. So there are people who are XY, who, you would think would be male, but who have female genitalia, things like this. So it may be something like that. It may be sometimes there are extra expression of testosterone, but then the body doesn't respond well to it. And so you have some masculization, but it's not as much as, regular male. And those people are usually XX. Anyway, it's some really complex biology. But basically, after doing a lot of research and looking at this and thinking about it a lot, where I sort of came down is that, someone like Caster, who has female anatomy, is raised as a female, lived her entire life as a female. I mean, what we're really doing when we have women's sport is we are breaking it down by gender, and gender is different than sex. Sex is, your chromosomes, and again, it's complicated. We don't just have male and female like most people think. But gender is really an identity. And it just seems fundamentally unfair to me to have someone who is born, raised, and, had an identity her entire life as a certain gender, and to say, no, that's not what you are. And we're not going to allow you to compete with other people of that identity. And, when you think about it, I feel like the arguments for her not being able to compete with women. And it's not just her. There are other women who have been targeted. At one point, the IAAF was requiring some of these women to have testosterone testing and perhaps even alter themselves in order to be able to compete, which just seems absolutely ludicrous to me. I mean, that's cruel. I think most people can agree to that. But, you're basically saying that women can't be too good. If you're too good, you have too much testosterone. I don't think anyone is arguing that testosterone does not enhance performance, but it's sort of saying, height can also improve performance in certain sports, not necessarily running, but there are other traits that we celebrate. So, it's really sort of putting limits and putting brakes on what women's sport can be, and saying that, if you're that certain traits or certain aspects of athleticism are male and others are female. And I don't think that it's an accident that these women that are being targeted have more masculine appearances. I think that if, let's say, there was a hormone that was performance enhancing that also made women more traditionally beautiful, maybe gave them more shapely breasts or something like that, I don't think that we would be treating them in the same way. I mean, so much of it is really enforcing certain body type stereotypes and saying, you can't look too manly. And there were a lot of things, and some of the other women competing against some of these women. And I'll also say that the women who have been targeted and who have sort of gone through the system with this have all been women of color from not European or North American nations, which is another sort of telling thing here. And so, I just think it's fundamentally unfair to tell women that they need to conform to certain stereotypes or certain body types or certain traits in order to be, identifying as the identity that they have and that they've inhabited their whole lives.
And, I agree with everything you were saying right there. Being an elite, I do get kind of a slightly different, because obviously I would have been out there competing, but at the same time, now I can be out of it. I can take a step back and take in the entire, spectrum of what's going on here and kind of understand. And I think you're exactly right with what you're saying. But then one thing that I'm curious about is what does the future look like with this? How can we keep this fair when other people will then say, okay, well then why is my level of this hormone being judged when testosterone is okay or this certain thing is okay? And, do you have any ideas of what kind of the balance is going to be, or where we're going to find like a kind of happy medium? Because obviously right now it's swinging a bit the other way, like, let's get rid of people straight away. Let's kind of, really make sure we know that they are fair and legal and everything. But then are we going too far with that? Where do you see the balance kind of falling?
Well, the biology isn't changing. I mean, this problem, to the extent that it's a problem, and again, I'm not convinced that it is, but this issue, I guess I should clarify, isn't changing. It's not as if all of a sudden we're having all of these women who are potentially intersex or, that are being targeted like this, that are dominating all of these sports. Now, that said, there are a few events where it seems as though intersex people may have an advantage, potentially. But I just, there are events where tall people have an advantage. There are events where very light people have an advantage. And I don't see why we should pick one trait and say this isn't okay. And if you have this natural talent or this natural trait that's giving you an advantage, it's okay if it's this trait, but it's not okay if it's this other one. And, this idea, I think part of the reason this is so tricky is that it opens the window here to this fundamental idea that we have that's false. And that is that there's a level playing field and that this is all fair. And that's just not true. I mean, the reason that you have some people who are superstars in their sport is that, they were born with these advantages. And, it's not a fact that you can just work really hard and become Olympic champion or world champion. I mean, you have to have, the talent is not enough either. It's not to say that hard work and all of those things aren't important. But, when you're looking at athletes at that level, there are these genetic gifts that people have. And so it just doesn't make sense that we single out one and not another.
No, that makes sense. And thank you for talking about that. And the next thing I want to talk about goes on from there to go one step beyond this, which is still in the track and field world. But firstly, I'll say to anyone listening, weigh in on this if this is something that you've thought about or any of these topics we talk about. Maybe, tweet at us. You can write it on the Facebook page. You can write it on the show notes. I'd love to kind of hear some of your thoughts as well. So don't be afraid to speak out and say what you think. So then, going on from there, you talked about a level playing field, which immediately made me think of this doping scandal that's been kind of going on. One of your articles you did write about was about track and field, scrapping its records. And, you had this great round table, I don't know, I guess you would call it.
It was.
With
Slack chat.
With Kara Goucher, an ESPN writer, Bonnie Ford, that is. And Alex Hutchinson, who I have interviewed before, so many of the listeners will know of him for sure. And obviously the other two should have heard of. So maybe you could just tell us a bit about, after this roundtable, after talking to those people and the research you did, what are your thoughts on the whole doping issue and how our scene actually looks right now within the running world?
Yeah, this is such a hard issue. And it's something I've written a lot about doping over the years. And it's really, really tough. I think that the intention of this proposal so basically the proposal would scrap records. I believe it's prior to 2005. I'd have to look that up and make sure. I'm pretty sure that's the year. And it wouldn't entirely scrap it, but it would say from then on. So basically it sets standards for anti-doping controls and things that would have to be met in order for a record to be recognized. And so you would sort of have the records that were prior to 2005, and then you would have the ones that were after, and that would be sort of the new records. And so, I think that having these standards for anti-doping measures is great. It's a good step, but I'm not comfortable with saying that we're going to erase records that happened before then. And part of the problem here, right, is that, there are multiple problems, but one of the problems is that we know that the doping controls that we have right now, to the extent that they work, they only work a little bit. Most of the biggest doping scandals that we've had have not come from positive tests. They've come through police work and other sorts of things. Marion Jones wasn't failing drug tests. Lance Armstrong, famously said, he was tested.
I've never failed a drug test.
Right. And so this is not to say, it's actually scientifically, it's a really difficult problem, the drug tests. And, you get this arms race between as soon as you have a test, then the race is on for the dopers to get around it. And I just think that the dopers are always going to be better funded than the anti-doping officials. That's just sort of the state of how it will always be. And so that's tricky. Really, to me, the solution to doping is to change the culture and to change the culture where, it is just not acceptable to dope. And you can say that we have that now, but the fact is, for a very long time, this win at all costs mentality. And when you have people, coaches and trainers who are promoting this stuff, that just, you can't have that. You need to have, and that's why these anti-doping efforts really, really need to target those people in the entourage, the coaches, the trainers, the confidants who are pushing this stuff and who are doing it among their athletes. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. But the other thing that I think is one of the reasons that I'm against erasing records that come from the quote unquote doping era. I mean, I think it's, first of all, we can't say that we're not in the doping era now
absolutely.
Because people are still, so to begin with, it's an artificial line. But then the other problem is that, you cannot prove that you're clean. Like, that is scientifically impossible. You can come up with evidence that someone isn't clean, but you can't, it's impossible. If you're a clean athlete, it's impossible to prove that. And I think that that's one of sort of the saddest and most problematic things about doping to me, is that it casts out on every wonderful, and extreme performance. And that really takes something away, if you're
absolutely.
And I feel so much for Kara Goucher and all that she's gone through, and people like her. And, I believe that she's clean, but this is the thing. There's been a lot of doubt cast on some of the athletes that have some of these records. Mm-hmm. The women's marathon record, there's been a lot of doubt cast on that. And, honestly, I don't know what to think about Radcliffe's record, but I think that if she is clean, and I'd like to give her the benefit of the doubt, it's really corrosive and toxic to just throw her under the bus like this. But then again, there's been a lot of doubt cast. And so you just have this atmosphere where nothing seems real and people can't be trusted. And that to me is the worst part for the sport, and the sport that I love. I just hate seeing that happen.
I know it's definitely difficult, and it has got to the point where any performance that's even slightly above, what's considered expected, immediately your mind jumps to, well, they're probably not clean anyway. Or, right. I found myself saying it after the World Championships, after a race, well, we'll find out in 10 years, just kind of, you can't help but jump to that way. And you're right that the culture has to be what changed. And just curious, have you seen the documentary Icarus?
No, I haven't.
It's on Netflix. But I'll put a link in the show notes, and I can send you the information.
I'd love to watch it.
But it's amazing and just blew my mind. It's all about, the scandal with the WADA and the IAAF in 2012 with Russia, but just kind of the level they went to keep those samples looking clean when they weren't. Right. And kind of the fact that what they kind of showed towards the end was that, this isn't over. And like you said, you don't know if we're still not in the doping era. And that kind of pointed towards they weren't sure if we are. So definitely worth a watch for anyone listening. And Christie, I will send it to you. But so then, with your situation where, you're writing about this, and it's something where it's, is this something really kind of exciting to write about, because it's something really you can get your teeth into and research. It must be kind of a difficult place for you to be in, because like you said, you love the sport so much, you're so passionate about it. But then at the same time, it's giving you something to really like chase after that you wouldn't have otherwise. Is that kind of the case, or is it just, I'd rather not be writing about this at all. I wish this was not existent, but then at least, our world would be clean.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I wish that I would love to never write another doping story again. I wish that it would go away. I wish that that sport in general could get away from this. And in fact, I did, so I had a very, very personal experience with this. So when I was at University of Colorado, I was on the cycling team, and one of my teammates was a guy named Tyler Hamilton, who went on to become a very well-known cyclist. He raced with Lance Armstrong at the Tour de France. He won a medal in Athens and ended up, it was actually I believe it was at the Athens Olympics. This is I've sort of pushed this all from my mind now. Mm-hmm. It was hard anyway, but he tested positive for a blood transfusion, and he insisted that he was clean. And he had been, I had known him in college. He was a personal friend. He was someone that I really admired. I was new to the sport, and he had reached out and just been a great mentor and a very nice person. And he was very well loved on our team. And so I really, really wanted to believe that he was clean, but looking at the evidence, it was sort of like, no, he's not clean. And knowing the culture of cycling as well, which had at that time, and who knows about today, a very strong culture of omerta, where it's sort of like everyone knows that it's going on, but you don't talk about it. And if you're caught, you pretend that, it's just you, and, you're this lone wolf, when in fact, the team had this systematic program and all of this. Anyway, so this happened, and it was really hard. I wanted so much to believe him. I ended up writing a long article about this for Bicycling Magazine. And this was during the time when he was insisting that he was clean. He had started a foundation. He was taking donations for his defense. He also started a foundation to help people with MS to sort of, bolster his image, and so on the one hand, you could say, oh, he's just a really nice guy who cares about this disease, or, well, he's really trying for some nice PR. Well, anyway, and I wrote this story and it was very difficult for me, but I concluded that he was probably guilty and that was difficult. And he was, I wrote about how he was exploiting people's willingness to believe or desire to believe. Anyway, and I it was, so among our friends from the old CU cycling team, probably about 2/3 of them said, great story, I feel the same, but a lot of them didn't feel comfortable telling him that they didn't believe. I mean, it was very awkward. There were a few who were very angry at me. They couldn't believe that I'd written that. Well, then it was at least a year or two later, Tyler actually went on 60 Minutes and confessed and accused Lance Armstrong of all of this, and he never called me and apologized or anything like that. But it was really, it was tough. But so it turned out that I was correct and he had been doping, but it left such a terrible taste in my mouth.
Yeah, I could see that.
It really did. And especially to just have known this person who at one point had felt like a friend, and seeing how the whole situation just exploited so much goodwill amongst people and just tarnished the sport to such a degree. And, I think that this is the same sort of thing that's happened so much in running as well. But yeah, it felt very personal and it was a really difficult story for me to work on.
Yeah, no, I could see that. And especially having someone that close to you that made it all the more real. I could see that being something that would really stick to you in, even though you're not running amongst the other professional runners who are out there competing against these people, or like you said, Cara Goucher, who's been, hurt by these people, you got to see it firsthand. So I could see that was tough and, very brave on you for sharing that, and obviously the right thing to do at the end of the day. And that kind of leads in, segues quite nicely to the final thing I was going to talk about, which is, I just realized the 3 articles I wanted to kind of mainly ask you about were, they're all very negative. So before we get into that, like, do you find ever that you kind of end up feeling, I don't know, like down or kind of a bit like the world is hopeless kind of thing because there's so much like scandal and things going on in the world? Or do you get to find, you kind of keep reminding yourself that there is good in the world and, these are just not little things, but they're things that are going on, but then there's obviously enough good in the world to balance out?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. And I do work at a political site, 538 is politics news. So, and I do have to write, I've written several Trump stories in the last year. So, it's writing about sport is never as bad as that. But I'll just say, I mean, at the end of the day, nothing beats running. I mean, there's nothing that a nice run in the mountains can't make a little bit better.
Well, actually, then let's go on to one of the other things while you're saying that. So an article you wrote for Runner's World, you talked about, is it Pia?
Oh, Pia, my sister-in-law. Yes.
Yes. So you wrote about a family member, close to you and what she went through. And, you talked about how you ran hard to kind of escape the pain. And I think that's quite a common thing for runners to do when they are kind of experiencing some kind of hurt, especially on a personal level. I did interview Alicia Shea, who I'm not sure if you're familiar with. And, she talked about her husband, Ryan, and she got quite upset talking about how, she really used and abused running to kind of escape what she was going through. So what made you kind of decide that this was something that would be good for Runner's World and you wanted to be kind of brave and talk about something like this, even though it was painful to discuss?
Yeah, it was. So this was an essay that I wrote for Runner's World about, I had taken care of my sister-in-law. She was dying of cancer, and it was just a really heartbreaking, difficult experience. And, losing someone I cared for and loved so much and watching her sort of wither away. It was really, really hard. And running was sort of the thing that helped me cope and allowed me to sort of get through it. And some of it, on the one hand, so while she was dying, it was sort of a way of feeling alive and knowing that I'm still here. It was sort of at times hard to separate myself from her because I felt so much empathy and so much pain for her. And so it was sort of a way of feeling separate and knowing that I was still living. But there is also sometimes when you have this sort of emotional pain, it's so difficult, but it can be sort of difficult to express.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would go out and just run as hard as I could and just, breathe really hard. And, I wanted to feel the burn in my muscles because it was just a way of sort of making this sort of nebulous emotional pain, turning it into something that felt more tangible,
mm-hmm.
and sort of expressing that. And after my essay came out in Runner's World, I got so many emails and so many letters about that essay from other people who had said that they had similar experiences and how much running had helped them deal with the death of a loved one or other, difficult relationship problems or losses. And so I do think that it was something that, it helped me very much, but I think that it's a common experience.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. And, I think everyone listening at one point or another has done that and kind of used running as a source of expression when, you can't maybe express other ways. And for the most part, I think, it gives you that peace and relief in the moment, even if, running hard isn't necessarily the best thing you can be doing if you're training for something. But do you have any thoughts on if you find you're doing it regularly and, you keep doing it day after day and your body is starting to break down? Like I'm thinking of Alicia Shea, she talked about how eventually her body just like snapped and it took her years to get out of the other side. But just someone listening, maybe not quite on the extreme that Alicia did, but is there anything you kind of notice, like thinking about that someone who is going through this, maybe, they can do something else as well to kind of deal with it rather than just kind of giving running 100% of the burden of the stress?
Yeah. I mean, look, running can't do it all. It's a really, for me, it was a really important part of getting through this, but it wasn't everything. And, I sort of went into a depression after this. And, I was fortunate enough to have a friend who intervened and said, you need help. And so, I got some counseling, which was really, really helpful. And I don't think, the running, like I said, was not enough to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay. So getting some help.
Yeah, don't be afraid to get help. And, some of that can just be, having someone to talk to, a friend, but it's a lot to carry by yourself too. And, I think I just needed, when I got some counseling, needed someone to sort of point that out to me and make me recognize the extent to which I was carrying so much burden myself and that I needed to unload some of it.
No, that makes sense. Great. Thank you. Okay. And then the final thing I wanted to discuss, which is, something you went through, which is kind of a difficult topic to talk about. And, I mentioned to you in our emails that I wanted to approach this topic with trepidation a little bit because some parts of it, my life could be misconstrued as like involved in this. But, you had a teammate who at 13 years old was, sexually abused by your coach. And, you heard the evidence yourself, were 100% convinced this was not her making it up, that this was, real. But you decided to publish a post about it, even though your former coach was never convicted. So, you said you wanted to discuss this. It's more common than we realize. So maybe talk a bit about what's going on here and how, often this actually happens.
Yeah. So just to be clear, so what happened, I was a freshman in high school, so 13 years old, and my coach was he was just someone I looked up to so much. He really took us all under his wing. He spent extra time with us. We would have practice, and then he would often take us to his house. We would have meals at his house, and on weekends we would go and do fun things, go do some trail running in the mountains there and things like that. And so he was just someone that we all felt so fond towards.
Mm-hmm.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. In retrospect, I could see that, there are things that he did that were very obviously, in retrospect, grooming behavior. And this is something, once you sort of know how to recognize this, it's very clear to see.
Mm-hmm.
And the girl on our team that he molested had, certain vulnerabilities, home life things that made her an easy target. There it's very possible there were other girls on the team who had also been targeted. I mean, this whole incident really split the team. What ended up happening is one of the girls went to the school to report him. She had actually recorded some conversations, tape recorded some conversations between them. I mean, it was, he had basically confessed. So it was very clear to me that this had actually happened. But anyway, but what ended up happening was the school fired him. Nothing was said. It was really brushed under the rug, which was pretty upsetting to me, and I understand the reasons for it. And I think some of the girls didn't want to come forward. It's a really tricky situation. Mm-hmm. But really what ended up happening was it allowed him to go and coach somewhere else. He ended up moving to another state. At some point during college, one of my high school teammates she had been running for a different college and had been at a meet and saw him there, and he was there with some high school girls coaching, which was pretty upsetting. Anyway, so I think it's a huge problem. Mm-hmm. And after I wrote my story, so this story that I wrote about it was for Slate magazine, Slate Online. And after that came out, I got a lot of emails from people, a lot of people saying that it happened to them. But throughout my running career, I've just, the other women runners I've known, I mean, it just sounds as though this is not an uncommon problem. Mm-hmm. And it's something that, authorities are often very reluctant to make public. It's hard. I mean, what ends up happening is you have these perpetrators who then go on to, they may lose one job, but then they go on somewhere else, and there's not much done to protect the girls. And I'll just say too that, so even though I wasn't targeted by him specifically, and he never did anything inappropriate to me personally, it was just a devastating experience to me, because what had happened was someone that I had trusted had betrayed that trust. And it really, I was still quite young, mm-hmm. and it really, it kind of pulled the rug out from under me and made me question a lot of things. Although I'll say in retrospect, I wish it had never happened. I if I could make it have not happened, I would. But it also, I think it helped me a lot later on to be able to recognize that kind of behavior and that kind of man, and sort of protect myself and be mm-hmm. able, I sort of have a creep radar that is very sensitive. And anyway, but I think what we're talking about here is something, we're not talking about, a college runner who ends up in a relationship with a coach who's, similar age and this is like predatory behavior by older men who are targeting girls. And this happens a lot. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I've been very interested in writing more about it. The problem is it's been very hard to find stories because of this. So mm-hmm. I'll just say, if there are listeners here who have stories to tell, please contact me, because I would love to write more about this. And, it's difficult to quantify because of these issues, but mm-hmm. it would be, really have been thinking a lot about how to write about it and how to write about and sort of figure out how common it actually is.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I will either put a link to your email in there, or if you're not comfortable with that, I'll have ask listeners to contact me if you don't see Christie's email on the show notes, and I will put you in touch with her. So if someone as a parent right now, and now, knowing I have a baby girl on the way, that obviously makes me think about, the future and stuff. Yeah. Thank you. But like, how are there some things that parents can kind of pay attention to with kids that maybe relating to their coach, that are kind of things that are, should be paid attention to, rather than, just regular behavior and getting to know the athletes? So is there any warning signs you would say people should kind of watch out for if they have kids themselves?
Absolutely. And one of the things, so just thinking about the contrast, so once this coach was fired and we had a new coach step in, so the molester coach, let's call him, it was always, there weren't other adults around. He wanted to spend a lot of time with us on his own, which, again, I don't want to say that that's always a sign, but, our other coach was always inviting parents along to things. So, we might have a dinner, but parents were invited to come and to be there. I think it's fine for coaches to, offer athletes rides home and things like that. But when it just becomes this thing where they're sort of, spending too much time, spending time alone, making it where they're sort of isolating them from, non-team events and things like that, stepping in as a parental figure can be helpful, but there's sort of a fine line there.
Yeah. No, I could see that. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And I just want to kind of clear up for anyone listening, Christie knows this, we spoke before, but the reason I was kind of nervous to talk about this is, as she mentioned about college and college coaches, my husband, Steve, was my former coach. And we got together a few years after I graduated, but we were always very, very nervous for those first, 4 or 5 years until he got a new job away from the university that we were both at. Until he got that job, we were very nervous, the two of us, that, he would be forever kind of judged about that. And, we're married 2 years and have a child on the way. So it wasn't, a one-off, it was a one-off thing, obviously. But, that's what made me nervous, because I never want him to kind of fall into that same category, which is obviously difficult. And I mean, now we're well past it, because people, know this was pretty serious. But
right.
But yeah,
I'll just say one other thing too is that I think part of the danger here is when that coach is using the position of authority and the position of power in order to create that relationship. And in this case, I mean, with my high school coach, this was a guy who was in his 40s, with teenage girls. So that's pretty clear. In college, I think it's a little more complicated. And I do think that there are very good reasons why, coaches should not be dating their athletes, as definitely. They're during that time. But so much of it too is this power relationship and the inequity there, and it can be very predatory, and so that's really what sets off the alarms, I think.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you so much for discussing that and kind of putting the word out there. And hopefully, I hope no one listening has been through anything like this. But if you have and you want to help others with it, then reach out to Christie, and I'm sure she'd love to get your opinion on things. Okay. So just one more thing. Sure. Kind of a bit more on your running, just to kind of sum up. Your work has kind of taken you all over the world. You've been able to race all over the world. So I just wanted to ask you, what is your favorite place to race and your favorite place to run of all the places that you've been?
Sure. So my very favorite race is the La Luz Trail Run. It goes up Sandia Peak in Albuquerque, which is where I went to high school, and my parents still live. And it's 9 miles? It's a hard race, but it's one that I started running that trail when I was in high school. I remember the first time that I completed the run and just felt such a sense of accomplishment. But I think it's the first race that sort of made me feel at home in a place, and that felt like mine and felt like something that, I somehow belonged to. So there's that. My favorite place to run is actually the Crag Crest Trail on the Grand Mesa, which is where I live now in Western Colorado. And in fact, I love the Crag Crest so much. It's a 10-mile loop, but there's on the top, the Crag Crest, which is what the trail is named for, is about 1.5 miles stretch along this high ridge with just 365-degree views, and it's gorgeous. And I love it so much that's my Twitter handle is Crag Crest. So.
Oh, I never understood that. I always wondered what that was about, but now I know. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. That makes sense. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And just before we get on to the Running for Real 4, I just want to ask you, if you were to give an Oscar speech, who are a few people you would thank, or maybe, some kind of, I don't know, a journalist award you haven't won, maybe, where you had to give a speech?
Well, I would certainly thank my husband, because he makes all things possible. He's very supportive of my athletic stuff, but also my writing. And so, he would be the one. And then, of course, my parents, who I love dearly. And my dad is actually probably the one who made me a runner. When I was in middle school, he ran a marathon, and I would go out on my bike to carry water for him. And that's kind of what planted the seed. Oh,
that's great. And then, so him talking about running and bringing you into it. For someone who is thinking, I'm just trying to think about someone who's thinking about being a journalist. They love to run, they love to write. Any advice you would give people of how they can bring themselves into it? Are you personally as someone who thinks everyone should write, or are you someone that thinks you should be good at it to really do it?
No, not everyone. Everyone should write if they enjoy it and they brings them joy. And journaling, blogging, etc. is great. It is something it's kind of like running. Everyone can run. Not everyone can win a race, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. And I think it's important to separate those. So I'd say writing is very similar.
Okay, cool. All right, we're just going to take a moment to thank our sponsor, and we'll be back with the Running for Real 4. I may have stopped running, but one of my favorite sponsors still makes its way into my food every day. Generation UCAN. You probably already know I'm a huge fan of UCAN. No, I used it as my sole fuel source in my 2:36 marathon. And yes, I was a little bit scared I would bonk, but my energy levels felt exactly the same the entire way. I didn't have those ups and downs, the sugar highs and sugar lows that gels gave me. But maybe you're thinking, yeah, Tina likes UCAN, but what is it? Well, UCAN is a carbohydrate source originally created for a little boy named Jonah, who continually had low blood sugar. Years later, UCAN is a favourite amongst many elites, including everyone's favourite, Meb Keflezighi. UCAN is giving Running for Real listeners 10% off using code RUNNINGFORREAL. So check out generationucan.com for more about UCAN and learn how it can help you control your blood sugar, fuel your races, and maybe make those bottomless pit stomachs of ours be happy for just a little bit longer post-run. All right, Christie, just 4 more questions for you, starting with either a unique nutrition tip or something that you personally use that other people might not know about your nutrition or something you eat.
Well, I'm a big fan of beer. So
that's a good one.
I think it's okay to have some. But no, for nutrition, I would just say eat real food. Don't obsess. Don't deprive yourself. Hunger's a great cue. Listen to it.
Love that. Yep, very true. All right, what about a running for real moment, a moment that only runners will understand?
I hope this isn't too gross, but
nope,
last year when I was doing my 5K project, I had some friends that were out visiting, and we decided to do this local 5K. And this was in July, and it was during cherry season. And I had eaten, let's just say I had eaten an enormous amount of cherries the night before. And partway through the race, I was in trouble. So I had to jump into the woods, and I thought no one could see me, but here came my friend. And so I got a lot of ish for that.
Very strategically placed word there.
Yes.
Okay. That's definitely a real one. And that's definitely one that I'm sure we can all resonate with at some point. So thank you for sharing. What about a high moment for you in your running?
I think that my favorite running moment was way back in high school. The day when I won the 1600 meters and the state meet. I had wanted to win that race so badly. And so my coach and I had sort of laid out this plan of how it would go, and sort of, I'd sort of hold back the first lap. And we had this very strategic plan, and everything went perfectly. And so it was just probably my perfect race.
Okay. That's good. And that's always a wonderful feeling when that happens. So thanks so much for sharing. All right. Finally, what do you tell yourself when you're standing on the start line?
Go.
Go. Hopefully not before the gun goes.
Right. Yeah. I'll start. When I'm standing on the start line, what I'm usually thinking is relax, because I've found that I actually have a thing where I feel like if I feel nervous, and also if I feel lousy during my warm up, I've taken that to be a good sign.
Yes, I agree with that.
Because I've had it happen enough. So I and I don't know if I'm just like, if it's just a very effective pep talk where I'm like turning that around, it's like turning that frown upside down, but it works. Like I definitely don't panic if I'm not feeling well during the warm up. And if I'm feeling a little nervous, like I feel like that's a good sign. Like if I'm not nervous on the start line, then I'm probably not going to have my best race. But I do focus very much on relaxing, because that's
great
where the magic
advice. Great advice. And I actually find a lot of the time I feel the same. Although the only thing that sometimes backfires when you say to yourself, yeah, but I feel really good today. What does that mean? Like, does that mean I'm going to run bad? But usually it doesn't work that way. Yeah. So finally, I asked my guests to send us a photo of them standing in a power pose, maybe something you would do on the start line to build your confidence, or, something you would do to make yourself feel better. Will you send us your power pose?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, Christie, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for, really diving deep into these topics. It's really interesting and great to hear from you. So congratulations on all you've done. Maybe you could tell us where people can find you.
Yeah. So my website is ChristieAschwanden.com. I know name's a little hard to spell.
I will put links in the show notes.
Yeah. On Twitter, I'm Crag Crest. It's Crag, like, craggy, rocky crest.
All right, then I will put links to those in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Well, I told you that was a unique one, and boy, did we get into some topics there. That was really interesting and just makes you rethink the way that you think about things. I love how much research she does for things, how passionate she is about running. Really great episode. And, I really want to take a moment to thank Christie for her time of being honest with us on that episode. So you can find everything we talked about and a link to her email address and all the other things that we mentioned about all the articles and everything else at tinamuir.com/episode 26. I want to take this moment to thank you so much for taking the time to tune in. It really, really means a lot to me that you have. If you have a suggestion for a guest, feel free to email me. You can tweet at me, send it on a Facebook message. I love hearing new examples of who I could have on, what kind of areas you want me to cover. And I'm constantly trying to think up of new ones like I did today with having someone who is a well-established journalist. And I thought that'd be something fun and a bit different. So I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on that. So next week we are talking to Chad Moy. He is someone who has had quite the ride with his life, ended up with a serious drug addiction, homeless, in and out of jail until he was finally kind of reached a point where he realized something had to change. He knew this was his last chance, and running and exercise were able to pull him out. And now he's helping others with their rehab and getting over things. And it's just an incredible story. So make sure you don't miss out on that one. To anyone racing Berlin this weekend, best of luck. Enjoy it. I've always wanted to do that one. And I'm sure you're going to have fun. Hopefully it's a great race. And I hope everyone else has a great week.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.